After Moody's cut the UK's coveted AAA debt rating, people have been viewing the UK Chancellor's budget statement as make or break. But regardless of whether this is being viewed as a political disaster for the coalition, investors are still concerned over whether the UK will be tipped into a technical triple dip recession. With the UK economy now at a pivotal point, I caught up with John Zhu, UK economist at HSBC, for where the economy stands right now. Hi John, well thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Since the last UK budget statement, what have been the main drivers for the UK economy, and of course, what have been the major surprises that have arisen since then?
Well, in 2012, I think there had been a lot of volatility in certainly the GDP growth data. We had, out of the 5 quarters, 4 quarters of contraction. So that was pretty disappointing, even if you put aside some of the things like the Jubilee, extra bank holiday, and then the subsequent bounce from the Olympics. Looking through all the volatility, however, I think the underlying growth in manufacturing and services is slightly positive, which is good, but we don't think is really good enough. What we've had is really still a failure to rebalance the UK economy away from services towards manufacturing.
Well, the focus has sharpened when it comes to UK manufacturing, but do you see this data point as actually a red herring when it comes to long-term growth for the UK economy?
I don't think so. I think it is important for the UK to rebalance. Clearly, before the financial crisis in 2007-2008, the UK had been boosted by very strong growth in services, particularly in sectors like government and financial services. It seems that those are not going to really return and become the drivers of growth in the future. So we may actually have to look towards manufacturing again. And there have been some success stories, particularly in places like car manufacturing or chemicals and pharmaceuticals. But the problem is rebalancing takes a long time. It takes time for people to be trained up in skills again, given that we had really quite a significant hollowing out of our manufacturing base. It's quite likely this won't be an easy process or short process, but I think there are signs that we are doing some of the right things, but we need to continue, I think, to really go and do more rebalancing.
Well, recent unemployment data has actually been quite positive for the UK. Do you see this as a turning point for the country, or do you see this being outweighed by many more fundamental issues?
Yeah, no, I think there has been significant fundamental improvements in the labour market. This has been one of the few bright spots in UK data. Employment is growing, people are looking for work, and firms seem willing to hire. So part of that is due to very low rates of nominal wage growth, and so firms finding it easier or cheaper to hire workers. But even so, that's still a positive for the UK overall. The sort of bad news from that is because, well, when wages are growing so slowly and inflation's about twice the level of wage growth, it means your consumers' real purchasing power is still declining. So on the whole, it's good that people are finding employment. The next step is really to improve real wage growth so that the consumer can start to be a driver of growth again.
Well, as you detailed, there are quite a few bright spots when it comes to the UK economy. But are there any fundamental issues that you feel need to be tackled right now in order to promote sustainable growth in the long term?
I think going back to the sort of rebalancing story, there are a number of supply side issues, I think. Part of it is because there had been quite, I think, a lack of investment in the UK economy, certainly in the lead up to the financial crisis. And in a way, we are now paying for past successes. So we didn't really invest, we saved too little, borrowed too much. And now, consumers and firms are still, I think, in a deleveraging mode. So perhaps there is a scope for the government to do more investment in infrastructure, which seems to be a good idea in the long run. So yes, I think there are things that certainly the government can do.
The latest public finances data has actually been rather positive, and some see it as a sign of the Bank of England policies actually filtering through the system and actually creating a positive effect on the wider economy. But do you see this as short-term gain and long-term pain, or vice versa?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting time in really the world of central banking. Certainly at the BOE, we have a new governor coming in a few months' time, and he's been full of new ideas, ways that Bank of England can change its framework, how it operates. So it is an uncertain, if interesting time. We think, however, that monetary policy, there are limits to what it could be expected to do. Certainly, if you believe that, as we do, that a lot of the problems are also supply side and more structural, then it's possible that monetary policy, even if you do add more stimulus, will not have much of an effect, or it won't do much to move the UK to, I guess, a higher growth equilibrium, because a lot of these structural problems are not going to be affected by more monetary easing.
And to round off, are there any events or data points that HSBC is particularly watching out for?
Yeah, things we're watching out for certainly is GDP growth, which is going to, Q1 I think is going to be positive, so we don't think the UK is going into a technical recession. It will still be fairly weak, so despite all the talk of triple dips and so on, at the end of the day, the UK economy is still some 3% below its pre-crisis level. So we're still in a very slow recovery, even though underlying growth is still slightly positive. So we think it'll be a long road back to recovery. And the other thing that we look out for, of course, is trade data. So aside from the sort of internal rebalancing between services and manufacturing sectors, there's the external side. The UK exports relatively little to the faster growing economies in the world. We have very high exposure to the euro area. Unfortunately, that means we are exporting over 50% of trade and services to the euro area, which is probably going to fall into recession. So the external balancing story is also something that we do a lot of work on, and we need to see, I think, the UK exporting more certainly to Asia as well as Latin America.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, John.
Thank you.